as we go to the phone lines and welcome in Josh Pate of 24/7 Sports. Josh, I do want to touch on some recruiting stuff with you later on, but with so much SEC news, man, breaking yesterday, I want to start there. Your initial thoughts on Bryan Harsin to the Auburn Tigers?
Well, my first thought was I thought I had carved out some time for myself to actually drive home. And Auburn picked the exact time that I chose to drive home to make a hire. So that was a fun time driving home yesterday, trying to listen to how many times the cell phone was going to ping. So the first thought was it was out of left field. Everyone I had talked to around the search, and no one had heard that name. Some people involved in the search, no one had mentioned that name. So, I understand the need to want to pitch this idea out there and promote the messaging that, well, this was our first choice, and that happens all the time. Well, that wasn't the case here. And, in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if this name wasn't even on the radar when the search began, contrary to what people may say. Now, that doesn't matter if he ends up being a good hire.
Mm-hmm.
So, next question is, obviously, is he a good hire? I don't know, because I don't think it's possible to know there, because it's impossible to even know if the factors are going to be in place that turned off a lot of other guys from that job. I don't know that it's so much even up to Bryan Harsin as to whether he's going to succeed. Now, if that's not the case, or if that's been overblown, and it's just how good a football coach is he, you got a shot there. And I'm not really of the opinion that it's going to matter a whole lot, or it's going to be 100% detrimental that he doesn't have a whole lot of SEC ties and that he's not familiar with the recruiting landscape here. It would greatly behoove him to fit those descriptions, but also, we've seen a guy like Urban Meyer, for example. I remember when Urban came into the league, not to compare these situations, but I remember when Urban came into the league, I remember everyone down here thinking this league's about to show him something, and it was the opposite. He showed the league something. He changed the league, and he didn't have any experience down here. Dude had never even set foot in the SEC. So it can happen. I just don't automatically recoil at that notion when you've got to at least credit Auburn for going and finding a really good football coach, and that's what they claim to have been looking for all along. So I'm certainly willing to give it a shot and hope for the best with them.
Josh, you're bringing in some excellent points. When Urban was at Utah and then he came to Florida, there was a lot of people questioning, would his spread offense work in this conference? We saw it did, and then some. But to your point about Bryan Harsin, Gus Malzahn was playing golf yesterday in the city where we broadcast in, man. So, and the question that Tommy and I have been asking our listeners this morning, is Bryan Harsin a better coach than Gus Malzahn? You're having to pay $21 million to get him out, and that's the question I'll put to you. We don't know yet at this point, but if Harsin ends up being a lesser coach than Malzahn, how bad does this decision look for the Auburn fan base and the boosters down there, man?
Well, it looks bad if he's as good a coach as Gus Malzahn.
Yeah.
Forget lesser
point.
coach. It looks as bad, if not worse, if it's just a trade-off period. And to answer your question, I have no idea. I know that's not a popular response, but to speak in definitive, no, I don't think he is a definitive upgrade. And that should be the underlying criteria, unless there's scandal involved, which there's never been a whiff of with Malzahn, by the way. Unless there's scandal involved, there should never be a change made at the head coaching position in the SEC or elsewhere unless you have a definitive upgrade. It's the only question I ever used to ask folks. If you've got a problem with your head coach, I don't have a problem with you making a move. It's your program. You handle it how you want to. But I'd have Auburn fans by the truckload come in the comment section and whatnot and DM me and email me every week. We got to get rid of Malzahn. Do you? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that sounds great. Who do you have that's an upgrade? And the response was always either some name out of left field that they had no shot at, or, well, I don't know, but we can do better than him.
Yeah.
Well, the same folks, and I'm telling you right now because I can go back and find the receipt. Some of the same folks who were in those emails and in those DMs telling me one thing about Malzahn and telling me how they felt about how they had to get rid of him are sure enough now of the opinion that I don't know if we just upgraded. Yeah. I don't know if this guy's even better than Malzahn. Yeah. So you got to be really careful what you risk for, because there's this big misconception in major college football that if you have average results, it can only go up. Yeah. And that's not true. There's just as much room to go down as there is to go up when you got average results.
Yeah. Josh, I'm a believer your success in this division and in just in the business in general is based on basically two things: coaches and recruits. I mean, you got to get players, and you got to have a staff. And any idea who Harsin will fill these vital coordinator roles with, and who he will hire to fill those 10 spots with? Because that's going to ultimately decide his success or failure at Auburn is who he hires as coaches, and can those coaches get players?
Yeah, you're right. So I talked to some people last night about Brian Harsin, the recruiter. And to be honest with you, got some very mixed messages. I don't know the guy. I've never met the guy personally. I had not, before last night, ever thought about how Brian Harsin can recruit. So this is a new thought for all of us, I guess, down here. The answer to that, so this is going to be really popular during this call. The answer to the staffing question is, I don't know, but there's a caveat to the answer. First thing we have to do is we have to find out if there are going to be any mandates within his agreement to having to keep guys on staff. Mm-hmm. But if you talk to folks close to Billy Napier, and you talk to folks close to Bill Clark, and maybe a couple others that were or weren't on the public's radar that had a look at this job, they were turned off by the notion that was put in their head by Auburn powers that be that there were going to be a couple of prerequisites staffing-wise that they were going to have to sign off on or agree to, and it was going to involve people either being retained or guys being put on their staff. And that's not going to fly with most legitimate coaches. Now, either Brian Harsin agreed to those terms or Auburn got desperate, said this is not going to work, no one's going to agree to this, and they changed those terms. And if that's the case and the guy's hiring his own staff, then it's ball game, or it's a game on, I guess. Not ball game, it's game on at that point. I do not know. I've seen a lot of names thrown around. I don't know which direction he wants to go.
So should be an interesting follow. Let's go a little bit further south. Let's go to Gainesville, Florida for the next conversation. As the hammer came down yesterday on Dan Mullen, as you look at the show cause order that was put on them, the recruiting violations that have been circulating around this program. What does this really mean for Dan Mullen and his staff? What was announced yesterday with what will be prohibitive for them moving forward?
I don't know that it's a massive deal. There's a very sadistic side of me that almost thought to myself, you know what? All right, then. And not to celebrate it, certainly not. But the big criticism around Florida, as well, short of maybe a time or two this year, it's not been really lack of a ton of discipline, and it's not been a lack of schematic edge over the opponent. It's been recruiting. It's been the fact that they're not in the same arena as Georgia. Now, you don't want to participate in an outright scandal in order to prove you're in that arena. But inevitably, when you do get in that arena, you're going to scuff your knees a time or two. You're going to get popped on the wrist a time or two. And one of the sure signs sometimes that someone is looking to get in that arena is they're not 100% clean in terms of their recruiting profile anymore. Like, there will be these types of headlines every now and then. But at the same time, you start to see the roster improve. And so it's just one of those things. It's not a fun headline to see. If you're a Florida Gator fan, you hate it. If you cover the SEC, you hate it. But there's this strange pill sometimes that you have to swallow in college football to understand, all right, well, you can either be 2-10 or you can be 6-6, or you can start to flirt with those big boy numbers. And, maybe, once or twice every few years you have some of these headlines. You got to decide, and it's each man and woman for him or herself. You got to decide how big a deal you really think it is. I'm not too turned off by it. I'm also not of the opinion that 5 years from now we're going to look back at these sanctions and say, boy, Florida's roster, it's terrible now, and it is a perfect reflection of what happened 5 years ago.
Yeah. We were really hoping this morning we could report that Dan Mullen had won SEC Coach of the Year, and then in the next headline, the sanctions that had come down on him as well. So we were really hoping that would be really juicy this morning. Coach of the Year has also been given a show cause order. So that would have been nice.
That's the way the documentary is supposed to work.
Yes,
sometimes
exactly.
It doesn't work out that way.
Josh Pate, 24/7 Sports with us here on the Morning Rush. Josh, let's continue on with this SEC conversation. Also some news that's been breaking, not just this week, but this past week. LSU letting go of Bo Pelini. Steve Ensminger is now going to retire. Didn't look like they were going to retain Scott Linehan. If you're Ed Orgeron coming off a really, really tumultuous season where the expectations were we're not even close to being met, what's your opinion of what's going down in Baton Rouge right now, 1 year following a national championship?
Well, it's been a mess on many different fronts. Some you can control because some just have to do with the football field or your coaching staff, et cetera. So you control all those. There's some other fronts that maybe you had the ability to control at one point, but once things happened, that stuff's out of your control. Title IX and whatnot, and you know, investigations into domestic violence. I mean, all those sorts of things. You don't put that toothpaste back in the tube, and you don't go buy a new tube either. So strictly, if we're talking football, it's got to be pretty humbling. If you're Orgeron, well, I would think it should be. It's got to be, or it should be humbling if you make a move on a guy like Dave Aranda, who you won a championship with, and then you hire Bo Pelini, and you're very vocal in the offseason. This is probably the biggest thing that caught my ear over the summer. And I talked about it at the time, kind of stored it away in the back of my head for future reference, was Bo Pelini coming in and Ed Orgeron finding the nearest microphone at every opportunity he could to say, we're way better defensively now. And there was nothing you ever saw on the football field this year that would ever have led you to believe that there was anything he could have seen in practice to warrant that. So it really wasn't football he was looking at. It was just spite that was fueling him. Whatever the deal was between he and Aranda, I can assure you there was nothing about Bo Pelini or his product that was put on the field that would ever lead any sane person to believe that the product was upgraded. And not only that, the guy was bringing home, I think the number was around $46,000 a week to coach that. Not a year, but a week, doing it every week and getting run up and down the field on. So at least they cut bait, and at least they understood this is not going to work. Now, the hiring situation is interesting because you got to keep in mind, I mean, you got to find guys who want to come there, and you are going to be able to pay a lot of money to have guys come there, and that's great. You're going to need to be able to do that because I can tell you the talk in the coaching world is one of a lot of uneasiness and a lot of speculation about how tenable the situation is at LSU, how thin the ice may be and how hot the blades on top of that ice may be with the off-the-field, non-football related stuff. And essentially what you're trying to sell potential candidates is you're trying to sell stability. And it's going to be hard to sell stability to potential coaching candidates if you're Ed Orgeron, which means you're either going to have to cross some guys off your list or you're going to have to overpay.
Josh, before we let you go, you had a lot of positive things to say about this Arkansas recruiting crop last week during early national signing period, and it was you and Barton Simmons talking about it's like, hey, you just look up and Arkansas's at 20, kind of like this season after a few wins they picked in. Just what are your takes overall in this Arkansas recruiting class and what Sam Pittman can build on this class moving forward?
I think it's ultra impressive. I mean, they're sitting there. So currently, they're, I think, as of 2 days ago, they were number 20 in our overall team rankings, and it is exactly as you said. That's how it struck me. We did 8 hours live, and so about halfway through that, I'm scrolling through that thing, and I say, wait a second, why have we not talked about Arkansas? We've talked about some teams ranked below them. I mean, Auburn was 20 spots below them. We had done entire segments on Auburn, but they got some guys, and they understand the challenge in front of them, okay? I am, as many people are, of the opinion they overachieved this year relative to the talent roster they had compared to some of the teams they played. But, I mean, when you talk about just a guy like Ketron Jackson, for example, that's a guy who has offers from a lot of places. I mean, that's a guy who can go play at a lot of places. And if you think about the highest-rated kids in their class, typically you would think if Arkansas had a high signing class, they must have just loaded up on offensive linemen. Well, they got a couple of pretty highly rated offensive tackles, but I'll tell you what else they have. The top three, as I remember it, that I looked at were all athletes. The top three rated kids there. And so what you think Arkansas football may be in the future versus what Arkansas football will be in the future, that may be two different things. And when I say you, I mean outsiders. You guys are following the team, but outsiders think, well, they'll just 3 yards in the cloud of dust it for better or for worse. I don't think that's what they're going to do. There will certainly always be a physical element to that team, But when you think about Green or Sanders or Jackson, those top kids they signed, no, man, they're looking to play right with you. If they need to trade points any given Saturday, they want to be able to trade points with you. So I'd be very excited if I was an Arkansas fan.
Josh Pate, the National Director of Video at 24/7 Sports. You can watch him at the Late Kick YouTube channel. Make sure you do that. Josh, really appreciate your time this morning, man. Enjoy the Christmas holiday, and hopefully we'll catch up to you in 2021.
Absolutely, guys. I appreciate it.